Koreans weeping and wailing, collapsing in the streets, their cries echoing through the icy air of Pyongyang. On that day, when the nation learned of Kim Jong-il's death, men and women screamed as if their world had ended. To outsiders, the sight was almost surreal, millions mourning a single man. But to them, Kim Jong-il wasn't just a leader. He was the country itself. His image had been in every home, his words in every classroom, his shadow on every wall. To understand why an entire nation could react this way, you have to go back, long before his name, long before the missiles and the parades, to the moment when the foundation of North Korea was laid. It's a story of manipulation, isolation, and survival. When Japan took control of the Korean peninsula in 1905, it did so under the guise of modernization. But behind the slogans of progress was oppression. The Japanese ruled with iron precision, armed soldiers in classrooms, police patrolling every street, and a system that stripped Koreans of their language, land, and dignity. Thousands resisted, forming guerrilla groups across the mountains. They fought and died in the shadows, holding onto the dream of a free Korea. By 1910, the resistance had been crushed, and the peninsula was swallowed into the Japanese Empire. Yet the spirit of rebellion never disappeared. It simply hid, waiting for a new ideology to give it purpose. That ideology arrived in the form of communism. Across the world, revolutions were reshaping nations. Lenin's victory in Russia inspired countless movements, and for Koreans living under Japanese rule, communism promised something simple: equality. No more landlords, no more colonizers, just a unified, independent Korea. Among the young men who embraced this vision was one who would become infamous, Kim Il-sung. Born near Pyongyang in 1912, Kim grew up during the height of Japanese control. His early life is blurred by propaganda, but what is known is that his family fled into China after being targeted for anti-Japanese activity. There, Kim was drawn into the orbit of Chinese communists, joining the movement in his teens. He learned their methods, their discipline, and their ruthlessness. By 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, and Kim joined the resistance. He was young, ambitious, and bold. He led small units of guerrillas across the borderlands, striking Japanese outposts and vanishing back into the forests. In 1937, Kim led an attack at the Battle of Pochonbo, where his forces raided police stations and government buildings. It was a small battle, but it became legend. For the Koreans who heard of it, it was a spark of hope. For Kim, it was the beginning of myth. The Japanese called him the Tiger. His success earned attention far beyond Korea, especially from the Soviet Union. As Japan tightened its control, Kim fled north, eventually entering Soviet territory. There he trained with the Red Army, waiting for the moment Japan would fall. That moment came in 1945. When the Second World War ended, Soviet troops stormed into the Korean peninsula from the north, while American forces landed in the south. For the first time in decades, Korea was free, but only in theory. Within weeks, it was divided. The Americans and Soviets split the country at the 38th parallel, a random line on a map chosen in half an hour. Neither side expected it to last. Yet, that line would become one of the most heavily guarded borders in human history. The Soviets needed a Korean leader they could trust, someone loyal to communism, experienced in war, and capable of commanding respect. Stalin's choice was clear: Kim Il-sung. In 1945, he returned to his homeland under Soviet escort. For many Koreans, he was a hero, a living symbol of resistance. But his legend had already been reshaped by Soviet propaganda. Some believed Stalin had even chosen an imposter to play the role of Kim, a man with a borrowed name and a manufactured past. The CIA later investigated the rumor and concluded that it might actually be true. that the man ruling North Korea wasn't the real Kim Il-sung, but a Soviet plant. Though historians today largely dismiss that theory, the mystery remains one of many shadows in the story of the Kim dynasty. Regardless of who he truly was, the man who stepped into power in the North began molding the country into something new. In December 1945, Kim became the first secretary of the Communist Party of Korea. It was the first step toward building his own empire. But from the beginning, it was built on division. The South, under American influence, began forming a capitalist government. The North, under Soviet guidance, became communist. The dream of a united Korea dissolved into ideology. In 1946, Kim launched sweeping reforms. He seized land from landlords and gave it to peasants. He nationalized banks, factories, and transportation. Every aspect of life became state-controlled. For ordinary people, it was a time of change that felt almost miraculous at first. For the first time, women were given equal work rights. Education expanded. Infrastructure was rebuilt. The economy seemed to recover faster than anyone expected. But beneath that surface of progress, something else was taking shape. A system of total control. Kim's government began categorizing people by loyalty. Former landlords, Christians, and anyone with ties to the South were quietly monitored, then removed. Those who supported Kim were rewarded. Those who didn't disappeared. As his power grew, Kim surrounded himself with loyalists, veterans of his old guerrilla forces. But there were other communist factions with influence too. The Soviet Koreans, who leaned toward Moscow, the Yan'an faction, loyal to China, and Southern communists led by Park Hon-young, who dreamed of reunification. Kim saw them all as threats. By the late 1940s, he began eliminating them, one by one. Meanwhile, the world was dividing into two camps, East and West, and Korea was caught in the middle. When the United Nations tried to hold free elections across the peninsula in 1948, the Soviets refused, so elections were held only in the South. Syngman became president, and the Republic of Korea was born. In response, Kim declared the North as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, with himself as premier. Two Koreas, two leaders, one inevitable war. In June 1950, that war began. North Korean tanks rolled across the 38th parallel, catching the South completely off guard. Seoul fell within days. The North's forces were well-trained, well-equipped by the Soviets, and ruthless. Executions of political opponents followed in every captured city. Kim Il-sung believed reunification was at hand. But he had underestimated the world's response. The United Nations condemned the invasion and authorized military action. American troops, led by General Douglas MacArthur, landed in a daring assault at Incheon. Within weeks, the tide turned. North Korean forces were driven back, Seoul was liberated, and soon the UN army crossed into the north. Pyongyang fell. Kim fled. His dream of uniting Korea under his rule was collapsing. Then came China. In October 1950, waves of Chinese troops surged across the border, catching UN forces by surprise. Entire divisions were forced into retreat. The war turned again. Seoul fell once more, then was retaken. The fighting dragged on for years, brutal and directionless, until finally, in 1953, both sides signed an armistice, not peace, just a pause. By then, millions were dead, cities were flattened, and North Korea was left in ruins. But from those ruins, Kim Il-sung built something even darker than war. He rebuilt his nation with 4 goals: tighten ideological control, rebuild the economy, strengthen defense, and never give up on reunification. He called it a rebirth. To the world, it looked like recovery. To his people, it became indoctrination. Factories and farms were rebuilt, but loyalty was the real currency. Schools rewrote history, teaching that Kim had personally liberated the nation. Every photo, every poster, every speech placed him at the center of everything. It wasn't enough to obey him. They had to believe him. When the Soviet Union began criticizing cult of personality leaders after Stalin's death, Kim pretended to agree, then did the opposite. He purged rivals who doubted him, accusing them of treason, foreign influence, or worse. Entire factions vanished overnight. Executions became a political tool. Fear became the national language. And so, by the late 1950s, Kim Il-sung stood alone, unchallenged, unopposed, and untouchable. His new ideology, Juche, promised self-reliance. North Korea would rely on no one, not the Soviets, not the Chinese, not the West. It sounded empowering, but in practice it isolated the country completely. Trade collapsed. Citizens were told to grow and build everything themselves. To outsiders, it seemed impossible that a nation could function this way. But Kim made it possible through something far more powerful than trade: control of thought. Textbooks, songs, films, everything glorified the state. Children learned that their lives were gifts from the leader. People who questioned anything disappeared into camps hidden in the mountains. The state created a system called Songbun, a secret caste ranking every citizen's loyalty. It determined everything: your job, your food, your education, even who you could marry. Those deemed untrustworthy were condemned to poverty or prison. Labor camps became a shadow network across the country. Men, women, even children disappeared for small offenses: a joke, a rumor, a missed work quota. Inside, they worked to death in mines and factories, their names erased. Guards were told that prisoners were not human, just traitors to the revolution. Still, Kim's grip held. By the 1960s, he had turned North Korea into a paradox, a nation that looked strong, yet lived in fear. Factories produced steel and machinery at record rates, but food shortages grew. Officials lied about production numbers to avoid punishment, which led to famine. Kim ignored the truth, declaring success, and propaganda made it real, at least on paper. People starved while newspapers praised abundance. Kim's obsession with control extended into every aspect of life. It was illegal to fold a newspaper with his photo on it, illegal to write over his name, illegal to speak his name without respect. Every household had his portrait on the wall, cleaned daily. In public, he was adored. In private, he was feared. And yet somehow, for many, he became the nation itself. He had built not just a government, but a living mythology. But the mythology was fragile. In 1956, a small group within the party decided they'd had enough. Soviet and Chinese-backed communists conspired to challenge Kim's rule, denouncing his purges and his obsession with personal glory. They thought they had support. They were wrong. When the meeting began, Kim's loyalists surrounded the hall, shouting down the dissenters. Within days, dozens of men were gone, executed, imprisoned, or simply erased. Moscow and Beijing demanded the killings stop. Kim ignored them. He didn't need their approval anymore. The message was clear: North Korea would follow only Kim Il-sung. By the end of the 1950s, he had absolute power. The cult of Kim was no longer just propaganda. It was law. Kim's image filled every classroom and factory. Students learned of his childhood genius, his heroic battles, and his flawless wisdom. Farmers received guidance from his quotes. Workers sang songs written in his honor. The line between truth and fiction blurred completely. In 1954, Kim introduced his first major economic plan, a 3-year drive to rebuild after the war. Steel, mining, and construction were prioritized above all else. Heavy industry became the lifeblood of the state, with more than 80% of all investment poured into it. Factories roared to life again, and propaganda films showed proud workers marching under banners of victory. On paper, the plan was a triumph. By 1957, the government declared North Korea's economy had recovered to pre-war levels. But behind the numbers, reality was darker. Officials, terrified of punishment for missing quotas, falsified reports. Crops that didn't exist were counted. Food that hadn't been grown was seized. Farmers watched their harvests disappear into government storage while their own families starved. A famine swept through the countryside. Thousands died. The government buried the truth, hiding it from the world and even from its allies. Only decades later would Soviet archives reveal the scale of the tragedy. An estimated 800,000 people died between 1954 and 1955. In some regions, nearly a quarter of children starved to death. But Kim's government declared victory. Posters went up showing happy peasants, full granaries, and the smiling leader guiding them toward prosperity. Reality didn't matter. The illusion was enough. After that, Kim doubled down on production. The next 5-year plan, launched in 1957, demanded even higher quotas. A propaganda campaign called the Cholima movement, named after a mythical flying horse, encouraged citizens to fly toward progress. Workers who exceeded their targets were given medals, public praise, and better rations. Those who fell short were humiliated, punished, or sent away for re-education. Factories became competitions. Families competed against each other. Everyone was watching everyone else. Fear kept them working. And the more they produced, the more exhausted they became. Machines broke, quality fell, and the numbers, still inflated, stopped matching the truth. By the early 1960s, North Korea was industrialized but brittle. While Kim bragged about record steel and fertilizer production, the people lived in shanty towns, malnourished and under constant surveillance. Food was rationed by loyalty. Those with good songbun, families descended from Kim's revolutionaries, ate first. Those from bad songbun families, descendants of landlords or religious people, were last in line. Every North Korean adult had a file. It contained everything: family history, work record, political behavior, even rumors. These files followed them forever. One wrong word could erase an entire bloodline's future. By the late 1950s, the country was divided into 3 classes: the core, the wavering, and the hostile. The core made up about a quarter of the population, trusted, favored, loyal. They lived in better housing and held government positions. The wavering were ordinary workers, neither trusted nor despised. And then there were the hostile, the lowest class. Former landowners, South Korean sympathizers, Christians, or anyone related to defectors. For them, life was a slow punishment. Your songbun determined where you lived, what food you received, what school your children attended, and who you could marry. And once labeled, it was nearly impossible to move up. This system wasn't written in any law. It was invisible, but absolute. By the end of the decade, the Kim regime had perfected it. Every North Korean now lived in a cage they couldn't see but could feel. Behind this system of control stood the hidden machinery of terror, the prisons. The North Korean gulags were modeled after Stalin's camps. Entire families could be imprisoned for one person's crime. Forced labor, starvation, and torture were the norm. Guards were taught that prisoners weren't human beings, but enemies of the state. Inmates mined coal, built roads, or worked in factories until they died. Some were re-educated through endless propaganda lessons. Others were simply never seen again. There were the Kyowaso, re-education camps for minor offenses, and the Kwanliso, political concentration camps for the condemned. Prisoners inside called it the land of no return. In one camp, survivors later recalled that guards used hunger as punishment, reducing rations to nothing until inmates resorted to eating grass, insects, or even rats. Still, the outside world saw only smiling parades. The regime's propaganda machine never stopped. It told citizens they were living in paradise, a country without crime, poverty, or unhappiness. Teachers claimed North Korean children never misbehaved. Officials insisted there was no blindness, no deafness, no illness, because socialism had cured all of it. Divorce didn't exist, neither did addiction. And if anyone saw otherwise, they didn't dare say it out loud. By the mid-1960s, North Korea was stronger militarily than ever. Kim had rebuilt his army, transforming his old guerrilla forces into the Korean People's Army, one of the largest standing armies in the world at the time. Every citizen was trained to fight. Children learned to shoot rifles by age 7. The country's borders hardened. Outside influence was banned. Foreigners were forbidden to enter without permission, and anyone caught trying to leave faced execution. Inside the country, Kim's image was everywhere. Murals showed him standing on mountaintops, light beaming around his figure. And yet paranoia still consumed him. He purged generals, politicians, and even war heroes. Anyone who gained too much attention vanished. By 1966, the border with South Korea erupted again in small but deadly clashes. North Korean infiltrators crossed the demilitarized zone, planting bombs, ambushing soldiers, and spreading propaganda. Then, in 1968, Kim approved one of his boldest operations, the Blue House Raid. 31 elite commandos slipped across the border, disguised as South Korean soldiers. Their mission: kill the South Korean president in his home. For days they evaded detection, but a chance encounter with 4 woodcutters changed everything. The soldiers believed the civilians would join their cause. They didn't. Within hours, the South Korean military was on full alert. Still, the commandos made it to Seoul, walking straight toward the presidential residence in broad daylight. They got within 800 meters before police grew suspicious. Gunfire erupted. The streets exploded into chaos. When it was over, 30 commandos were dead. 1 escaped. 1 was captured. The failed assassination nearly sparked another war. Days later, North Korean forces captured a U.S. spy ship, the USS Pueblo, off the coast. The crew was taken hostage, beaten, and paraded on television. North Korea claimed victory while the U.S. weighed its options carefully, unwilling to ignite another full-scale conflict in Asia. The world watched as the crisis escalated, expecting the worst. But by the end of 1969, things quieted. Behind the scenes, Kim was reeling. The border provocations had achieved nothing but humiliation. His allies in Moscow and Beijing were furious. The generals who had failed him were purged. By 1970, Kim turned inward again, focusing on rebuilding the economy. He launched what he called the Great Leap Onward, a campaign to modernize industry and increase production. Ironically, to achieve self-reliance, he turned to the West. North Korea began importing advanced machinery from Europe and Japan, buying on credit with no intention of repayment. For a few years, it worked. New factories, steel plants, and cement complexes rose across the country. But soon, creditors realized Pyongyang wasn't paying. Trade dried up, and Kim's dream of rapid modernization collapsed. In the midst of all this, strange stories emerged, stories that would capture the imagination of the world. One involved an American soldier named James Joseph Dresnok. In 1962, miserable and alone, Dresnok deserted his post in South Korea, crossing the minefields into the north. Instead of execution, he found acceptance. The regime turned him into a propaganda tool, showing him as proof that even Americans preferred life under Kim. Dresnok lived the rest of his life in North Korea, teaching English and acting in propaganda films. He died there in 2016, buried not as a defector, but as a citizen of the regime. Stories like his fascinated outsiders, but for North Koreans, they were cautionary tales. Proof that no matter who you were, once inside the country's grasp, you never left. Kim's power was unshakable. But by the late 1970s, the country's prosperity began to falter. Factories slowed. Imports stopped. Famine loomed again. So Kim looked for ways to distract the people. He poured resources into massive construction projects, monuments, dams, and towers meant to symbolize North Korea's greatness. Some were impressive, others were disastrous. The Nampo Dam, a colossal sea barrier, was completed in 1986, a rare success. But the Ryugyong Hotel, a 1,000-foot pyramid meant to showcase Pyongyang's modernity, became an embarrassment. Construction stopped midway. The empty shell still looms over the skyline today, a monument to failed ambition. At the same time, Kim's son, Kim Jong-il, was emerging from the shadows. For decades he'd been hidden from the public, quietly rising through the ranks of the party. He loved movies, especially Western ones. Behind closed doors, he collected hundreds of foreign films and dreamed of creating a North Korean Hollywood. But North Korea lacked talented filmmakers, so in 1978, Kim Jong-il ordered a kidnapping. South Korean actress Choi Eun-hee and her ex-husband, director Shin Sang-ok, were abducted and brought to Pyongyang. There, Kim treated them as honored prisoners, giving them homes, wealth, and film studios, but no freedom. Under his supervision, they produced propaganda films, including Pulgasari, a North Korean version of Godzilla. After 8 years, they escaped while on a trip abroad, exposing the regime's bizarre obsession with image and control. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a world where art, politics, and paranoia fused into one. By the 1980s, Kim Jong-il had been chosen as his father's successor. His face appeared beside Kim Il-sung's in homes across the country. Propaganda hailed him as the party center, the genius who would continue the revolution. But outside the country, North Korea's reputation grew darker. In 1983, North Korean agents planted a bomb in Rangoon, Burma, in an attempt to assassinate the South Korean president. The blast killed 21 people, including government officials and civilians. 4 years later, in 1987, North Korean agents blew up Korean Air Flight 858, killing 115 people. It was an act of terror that horrified the world and confirmed what many already believed. North Korea had become a rogue state. International sanctions tightened. Isolation deepened. Inside, Kim Il-sung was aging. His country's economy was failing. The people were poor, hungry, and afraid. But the propaganda remained unchanged. North Korea was strong, unified, and righteous. In July 1994, Kim Il-sung died of a heart attack at the age of 82. The streets of Pyongyang filled with mourners, weeping uncontrollably. Factories stopped. Schools closed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Was the grief real? Some of it was. Decades of indoctrination had made Kim Il-sung not just a leader, but a symbol of life itself. Without him, many felt lost. Others cried because they had to. Not crying could be seen as disloyalty, a dangerous mistake in a country where loyalty meant survival. 2 million people attended his funeral, lining the streets as his coffin passed. Kim Jong-il, his son, walked beside it, silent, solemn, already preparing to inherit a nation built on fear. Kim Il-sung was declared eternal president, ensuring his presence would never truly leave. His embalmed body was placed in the Kumsusan Palace, where it remains on display. But his death didn't end the story. It only began a new one. Kim Jong-il inherited a country in crisis. His father's death left behind not just a legacy, but a crumbling system struggling to survive without him. The world had changed. The Soviet Union, North Korea's lifeline for decades, had collapsed. China had embraced capitalism, and North Korea, so proud of its self-reliance, suddenly found itself completely alone. The facade of stability began to crack almost immediately. Factories that relied on Soviet oil and spare parts shut down. Crops failed as fertilizer imports stopped. The country's energy grid collapsed, plunging cities into darkness. The once vaunted industrial miracle that Kim Il-sung had built simply stopped working. Then came the floods. In 1994 and 1995, heavy rains destroyed farmland across the country. Fields were submerged, roads washed away, and entire villages vanished under the water. Food reserves ran out. The government called it a temporary setback, but to the people, it was the beginning of something much worse. A famine so catastrophic it would later be remembered as the Arduous March. By 1996, starvation was everywhere. People began eating bark, grass, and roots. Families dug through frozen fields for anything edible. Children wandered the streets alone, gaunt and silent, looking for scraps. The markets, which the government had long tried to suppress, became the only way to survive. People traded stolen grain, old clothes, and anything they could find for food. Those caught trading illegally were beaten or imprisoned, but most didn't care anymore. Even soldiers began to starve. In some regions, they broke into homes and took food by force. The government's official stance was denial. Kim Jong-il ordered the press to call it a food shortage, not a famine. He blamed weather, foreign sanctions, and traitors within the party, but never himself. Then came the secret police. The Simwajo, a shadowy investigative unit created in 1996, began hunting those who spoke too openly about hunger or questioned the government. Thousands of party officials were executed for spreading false information. Whole families vanished overnight. One high-ranking agricultural secretary was executed by firing squad. The General Party secretary was tortured to death. Over 10,000 people were killed in the purges, and another 15,000 were sent to concentration camps. The famine dragged on for years. International aid finally arrived in 1998. Shipments of rice, corn, and medicine from the United Nations and China. Kim accepted it grudgingly, fearing it made his country look weak. By the time the famine ended, somewhere between 600,000 and 3 million people were dead. Yet even in tragedy, propaganda never faltered. Posters appeared showing smiling farmers holding overflowing baskets of grain. Television programs showed children singing songs about plenty. Reality was starvation, the illusion was strength. When the worst had passed, Kim Jong-il began reshaping North Korea in his own image. His father had ruled through ideology and revolution. Kim ruled through fear and spectacle. He introduced Songun, the military-first policy. The army would now stand at the center of everything, politics, economy, and culture. It was a way to secure loyalty. The military became his shield, and in return, he fed them first. For the rest of the nation, food remained scarce. Factories were repurposed for weapons. Soldiers worked in fields, built roads, and mined coal when not drilling. Kim turned the army into both a military force and a labor corps, ensuring that even in peace, his soldiers would never stop serving him. He spoke of patriotism, but his real goal was control. Songun blurred the line between citizen and soldier. Everyone was told they were part of an endless battle against enemies everywhere. South Korea, America, Japan. In school, children practiced marching drills and learned to assemble rifles. Adults performed military training on weekends. It wasn't about defense, it was about obedience. The famine had shattered faith in the system. Songun stitched it back together with nationalism and paranoia. But Kim also understood something his father hadn't: the importance of image. He was fascinated by film, fashion, and performance. He understood how emotion could be weaponized better than any speech or policy. He created grand parades, thousands of synchronized dancers, soldiers marching in perfect rhythm, jets streaking across the sky. The outside world saw insanity. Inside North Korea, it looked like unity. In 1999, while his people were still rebuilding from famine, Kim ordered a new class of propaganda films, lavish epics glorifying the state. Cameras panned across perfect villages and happy workers. The message was clear: North Korea was recovering. Behind those scenes, life remained desperate. At night, entire cities went dark. Pyongyang was one of the few places with consistent electricity. In the countryside, people lit fires with broken furniture and scraps of coal. Still, Kim's control tightened. By 2000, the state began experimenting with small economic reforms. Markets that once operated illegally were quietly tolerated. The government called it a temporary measure, but for many it was the first taste of freedom in years. Women in particular became central to this underground economy. While men were forced into government-assigned jobs, women began running black market stalls, selling everything from grain to cigarettes. They became breadwinners, and with that came quiet defiance. The government noticed. By 2007, Kim banned women under 50 from working in markets, an effort to push them back under control. But by then, the market had already taken root. Something irreversible was happening. For decades, North Korea's power came from isolation, but with trade, however small, came whispers, stories of life beyond the border. Contraband radios, smuggled DVDs, and foreign clothes began trickling in through China. Through static-filled broadcasts, people heard South Korean music for the first time. They saw news that contradicted everything they'd been taught. For a government built on lies, information was the deadliest weapon of all. Meanwhile, on the world stage, Kim was playing his own dangerous game. In 2002, U.S. President George W. Bush labeled North Korea part of an axis of evil. Pyongyang responded with fury, vowing to strengthen its nuclear capabilities. In truth, the nuclear program had been growing for years. Kim saw nuclear weapons not just as protection, but as leverage. They made the world pay attention. In October 2006, North Korea tested its first nuclear bomb. The explosion was small, but symbolically, it was enormous. For the first time, the regime had the power to demand, not request, respect. The test drew condemnation, but also gave Kim exactly what he wanted: relevance. Sanctions followed, yet they only strengthened his propaganda. He told his people, "The world fears us because we are strong." He wasn't entirely wrong. Behind the closed borders, the regime was changing in subtle ways. Kim allowed the construction of the Kaesong Industrial Park, a rare collaboration with South Korea. It allowed southern companies to hire North Korean workers with their wages paid directly to the state. For a brief moment, cooperation seemed possible, but it wouldn't last. The economic reforms that began with cautious optimism collapsed in 2009, when Kim attempted a disastrous currency revaluation. Overnight, all old banknotes were declared worthless. Citizens were told they could exchange only a small portion for new money, far less than what they had saved. The result was chaos. People lost everything. Markets froze, inflation exploded overnight, shops closed, prices skyrocketed, and protests, something almost unheard of in North Korea, broke out in several towns. Kim reversed the policy weeks later and executed the finance minister responsible, but the damage was done. It was the closest the regime had ever come to losing control from within. By the late 2000s, Kim's health was deteriorating. He'd suffered strokes, and rumors of his death circulated constantly. Behind the scenes, he was preparing his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, to succeed him. Few in North Korea knew who Jong-un was. He had spent much of his youth abroad, studying in Switzerland under a false name. He was quiet, reportedly polite, and obsessed with basketball. In 2010, he appeared publicly for the first time, round-faced, smiling, wearing a military uniform. He was given the rank of 4-star general without ever having served a day in combat. When Kim Jong-il died suddenly in December 2011, the transition was immediate. The country fell into mourning once again. State TV showed endless footage of citizens sobbing, collapsing in snow, holding one another as they cried out for their fallen leader. To outsiders, it looked like theater. Inside the country, it was survival. Kim Jong-un inherited not just a nation, but a system so entrenched that even small changes could shake it to the core. He was young, inexperienced, and surrounded by men twice his age who had served his father and grandfather. To assert control, he did what every Kim before him had done. He purged his enemies. His uncle, Jung Song-thak, one of the most powerful men in North Korea, was accused of treason. He was executed in 2013. Dozens of officials followed. Some were reportedly shot. Others burned alive. The message was clear. The new Kim was not to be underestimated. But Kim Jong-un wasn't his father. He appeared in public often, smiling, laughing, shaking hands. He brought his wife, Ri Sol-ju, to official events, breaking tradition. He introduced pop concerts, sports festivals, and even amusement parks. It was a new kind of dictatorship, one wrapped in smiles and spectacle. But behind the polished image, the old machinery of fear kept turning. Kim Jong-un intensified border security. Defection, once difficult, became nearly impossible. New electric fences, motion sensors, and drones watched the northern frontier. Anyone caught escaping faced execution or, worse, punishment for their entire family. Still, people tried. Some fled across frozen rivers into China. Others bribed guards, risking everything for freedom. Those who made it out told stories that sounded impossible, stories of starvation, torture, and indoctrination so deep that even after escaping, many still woke up reciting propaganda slogans in their sleep. Kim continued expanding his nuclear program. He ordered multiple missile tests, including the powerful Hwasong-15 in 2017, capable for the first time of reaching the United States. Each launch triggered global panic, but inside North Korea, they were celebrated like holidays. Children were given sweets. Fireworks filled the sky. Kim stood on balconies, waving to cheering crowds, the cameras capturing every smile. He knew how to play his role. At the same time, he embraced technology, not for progress, but as a new weapon. Under his leadership, North Korea built one of the most aggressive cyber warfare programs in the world. State hackers infiltrated banks, corporations, and governments, stealing billions. In 2014, when a Hollywood movie mocked him, The Interview, North Korean hackers retaliated with one of the largest cyber attacks in history, crippling Sony Pictures and leaking confidential data. It was a warning. The battlefield had changed. And yet Kim also craved recognition. In 2018, something no one expected happened. Kim met U.S. President Donald Trump. The world watched in disbelief as the two men shook hands in Singapore, smiling before cameras. For a moment, peace seemed possible. But negotiations failed. By 2019, North Korea resumed its tests. Today, the country remains as isolated as ever, cut off from the world by walls of fear, secrecy, and propaganda. The people wake up to the same slogans, the same portraits, the same promises. Electricity flickers, rations shrink, but the regime endures. When COVID-19 swept the world, North Korea sealed its borders tighter than ever. The government claimed it had 0 cases. The truth, as always, remains unknown. Even as famine returns and sanctions bite harder, Kim Jong-un appears calm, smiling, confident, just like his father and grandfather before him. But behind that calm lies a question the regime cannot silence forever. How long can fear hold a nation together? Because one day, even in the quietest, most controlled corner of the earth, someone will stop bowing. Someone will stop believing. And when that day comes, the walls of silence that have held for generations may finally begin to crack. Life inside North Korea moves in a rhythm that never changes. The same morning broadcasts, the same speeches echoing through loudspeakers mounted on every street corner. The voice of the state is inescapable. From dawn until dusk, it fills the silence with patriotic songs and endless praise for the leader. In Pyongyang, the capital, streets appear clean and orderly. The citizens dressed neatly in gray uniforms and red pins displaying the leader's face. Foreign visitors, those few allowed to enter, often describe it as eerie, like walking through a perfectly rehearsed play. Everyone knows their role. No one steps out of line. Even the smallest details of daily life are carefully scripted. On television, hosts smile with identical expressions. Weather reports end with thanks to the leader for the favorable climate. Every piece of art, music, and literature exists only to reinforce one message: gratitude. In schools, children learn mathematics through problems about artillery production and history through the victories of the Kim family. They grow up reciting slogans before they can even read, their understanding of the world shaped entirely by what the regime allows them to know. Most have never seen the internet. The global web doesn't exist for them. Instead, there's Kwangmyong, a state-controlled intranet, a closed network of government-approved sites and propaganda archives. Every search leads back to the same conclusion: the leader is wise and the outside world is dangerous. Radio is no different. Official radios are sealed to prevent tuning into foreign frequencies. Those caught modifying them risk imprisonment, or worse. But even in the most controlled societies, information leaks through. Along the northern border, smugglers risk their lives bringing in USB drives loaded with South Korean dramas, Western movies, and music. These glimpses of freedom, however small, are enough to plant seeds of doubt in minds raised on state propaganda. In secret, people gather to watch these forbidden shows, hiding televisions behind curtains, turning the volume low. For some, it's entertainment. For others, it's revelation. The danger, though, is immense. Kim Jong-un's government has made cultural influence a matter of national security. In 2021, the regime passed what it called the Anti-Reactionary Thought Law. Under it, owning or distributing foreign media is punishable by death. Students caught watching South Korean content have been publicly executed as warnings to others. Haircuts, clothing, even slang, everything is regulated. There are only 15 approved hairstyles. Jeans, considered symbols of capitalism, are banned. Western fashion is condemned as moral decay. It's easy to see these rules as absurd, but for the regime, they serve a purpose. In a country built on control, individuality is rebellion. Yet despite all this, cracks exist, small but undeniable. Pyongyang has grown a small middle class known as donju, meaning money masters. These are citizens who've profited quietly from the black market or found ways to connect with the outside world through business ties. They wear designer suits, dine in expensive restaurants, and send their children to elite schools. Their existence is tolerated barely because they sustain the economy the state can no longer fully manage. But beneath their privilege, fear remains. No amount of money can protect them from accusation. In a single night, a favor owed or a careless word can undo everything. For most, life remains a daily calculation between obedience and survival. Outside the capital, it's a different world. Villages without electricity, roads that vanish into the forest, hospitals without medicine. Malnutrition still stalks the countryside. Farmers work with wooden tools, pulling plows by hand. In the markets, goods are scarce. A single kilogram of rice can cost more than a month's wage. Even so, they smile for the cameras when visitors arrive. They know they must. The illusion is everything. The few who escape tell stories that sound almost unreal. Stories of hunger, of endless indoctrination, of fear so constant it becomes routine. One defector described how every home had to display portraits of the Kims in the most honored place. Inspectors would visit unannounced, checking for dust. If the portraits weren't spotless, it was treated as treason. Families scrubbed the frames daily, terrified that a speck of dirt could destroy them. Another recalled school assemblies where children confessed minor wrongdoings before their classmates. Even forgetting a slogan could be seen as ideological weakness. Teachers encouraged them to inform on each other, creating generations raised to spy, not trust. Trust, after all, is dangerous in North Korea. The system survives because no one knows who believes and who pretends. Everyone wears the same mask. But the cracks widen each year. Technology has changed the game in ways the regime struggles to contain. Chinese cell networks bleed across the northern border, allowing brief, forbidden contact with the outside world. For some defectors, that signal is their only lifeline, a whispered phone call to family left behind, a voice carried through static across a frozen river. Those who make it out often describe a moment when their illusion broke, something small that made them question everything. For one woman, it was seeing South Korean soap operas smuggled into her town. The characters lived freely, spoke openly, and ate food she had never even seen. "They looked like us," she said, "but they laughed in ways we didn't know how." For another man, it was a simple map. In school, he was taught North Korea was the richest nation on earth, that people elsewhere envied them. Then, one day, he saw a foreign map showing South Korea lit up at night, while the North was dark. He realized in that moment how deep the lie went. These realizations don't come without cost. Escape is almost impossible now. The border with China, once porous, is lined with new fences, electric sensors, and armed patrols. Drones monitor movement. Refugees caught by Chinese authorities are deported back, where imprisonment or execution awaits. Some still make it. They crawl through mountains, hide in trucks, or wade across rivers at night. Others don't survive the journey. For those who do, adjusting to freedom is its own battle. Many carry the scars of indoctrination for years, struggling to believe in what they see. Simple things, lights that never go out, shelves filled with food, feel like dreams they might wake from. And yet, every defector becomes a witness, a living reminder that the truth can escape even the thickest walls. As for Kim Jong-un, he continues to shape the country in his image, equal parts modernization and terror. He presents himself as youthful, approachable, a leader of the people. He smiles for cameras, jokes with soldiers, and poses with children. State media shows him giving on-the-spot guidance, his presence supposedly inspiring miracles of production wherever he goes. But the executions haven't stopped. Neither have the purges. Ministers vanish overnight. High-ranking officials fall from grace, accused of disloyalty or corruption. The pattern repeats, as it always has. Power in North Korea is a cycle of loyalty, fear, and erasure. When Kim's half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, was assassinated in a Malaysian airport in 2017, it confirmed what the world already suspected: the regime's reach knows no borders. Two women approached him smearing VX nerve agent, a chemical weapon, on his face. Within minutes, he was dead. The women claimed they thought they were participating in a prank show. The masterminds were never caught. The world knew who was behind it. The message was unmistakable. Betrayal has no safe distance. That same year, another tragedy shocked the world. Otto Warmbier, an American college student visiting North Korea, was arrested for allegedly taking a propaganda poster from his hotel. He was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. When he was finally released 17 months later, he was in a coma. He died shortly after returning home. The North claimed it was food poisoning. The doctors who examined him disagreed. It was a reminder, no matter how small the act, the state always responds with cruelty beyond comprehension. Inside the country, Kim's grip remains ironclad. But even iron rusts. Every generation inherits the same rituals, the same myths. But something subtle has changed. The young, those born after famine and raised in an age of contraband technology, are different. They've seen glimpses of the outside world. They know the lies. And though they can't say it out loud, doubt is contagious. Even the government's own attempts to modernize, smartphones, new apartment complexes, luxury stores, have created contradictions. Propaganda tells citizens their country is self-sufficient, yet their leader drives imported cars, wears Swiss watches, and smokes Western cigarettes. The contrast grows harder to ignore. Still, the fear remains effective. When Kim appears in public, tens of thousands line the streets, waving flags and crying. They've seen what happens to those who don't. In 2020, when COVID-19 swept the globe, North Korea sealed its borders entirely. The government claimed 0 infections, yet witnesses near the Chinese border reported soldiers in hazmat suits burning bodies. The truth, as always, was buried. The isolation deepened, trade nearly stopped, food shortages returned, yet Kim continued missile tests, each launch celebrated as proof of defiance. The world condemned, sanctioned, and speculated, but no one intervened. Because North Korea survives not through strength, but through unpredictability. It's a nation built on mystery, a puzzle the world can't solve without risking chaos. When Donald Trump stepped into North Korean territory in 2019, it was the first time an American president had ever done so. Cameras captured the handshake, the brief smiles, the illusion of progress. But within months, talks collapsed. Kim had gained what he needed, a moment of legitimacy. Now, years later, North Korea remains unchanged on the surface. The parades continue, the missiles fly, and the people bow. But beneath that surface, quiet shifts are taking place. Defectors speak of whispers, small acts of resistance, smuggled radios hidden in walls, banned music passed between friends, secret prayers whispered for freedom, tiny rebellions, invisible to the regime but powerful in their persistence. Even the elite are not immune. Some officials' families have begun fleeing, risking everything to escape the system they once served. It's a pattern that repeats in every dictatorship. The tighter the grip, the more people slip through the cracks. Yet for now, the Kim dynasty endures. Kim Jong-un's daughter has begun appearing in public, holding his hand at military parades. It's a signal to the world, and to his people, that the dynasty will continue, that the bloodline, the symbol, will not end with him. But history has a way of erasing even the strongest empires. The same isolation that shields North Korea also starves it of change. Technology, communication, and time are the enemies no border can keep out forever. Every photograph of Kim smiling, every missile launch, every parade hides the same quiet truth. Beneath the show there is fear. Fear of collapse. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that one day the silence will break. And when it does, the echoes of 70 years of control, suffering, and deception will come crashing down like a wall of glass. For now, North Korea remains suspended in time, part past, part present, a nation where the illusion of power still holds against the weight of truth. But no illusion lasts forever. One day, the lights will turn on, and the people will see what was hidden all along. And when they do, the world will witness the final chapter of a story that began with a man who called himself a liberator and built a kingdom of fear instead. To outsiders, North Korea looks frozen in time, a place where the past refuses to die. But to those inside, time moves differently. The regime's control isn't just about laws or weapons. It's psychological, deeply ingrained, and invisible. Every person is born into the state's grasp. Their name, their future, their beliefs, all decided before they can speak. In the eyes of the regime, citizens don't exist as individuals. They exist as extensions of the nation itself. Even family, is secondary. From an early age, children are taught that loyalty to the leader comes before loyalty to their parents. They're encouraged to report anything suspicious, unapproved conversations, jokes, even sighs of frustration. Imagine growing up in a home where your own child might betray you. That's how control sustains itself, not just through violence, but through distrust. Every classroom has portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il hanging above the chalkboard. Every morning, students bow to them before lessons begin. Teachers speak of the leaders as heroes who conquered impossible odds, men who invented everything from modern farming techniques to space travel. The younger Kim Jong-un is described as their perfect successor, brilliant, athletic, compassionate. There are stories of him driving a car at age 3, of shooting perfect scores the first time he picked up a rifle, of solving complex engineering problems as a child. The citizens repeat these tales not because they believe them, but because it's safer to pretend they do. Propaganda is everywhere, but it doesn't shout all the time. Sometimes it whispers, it seeps into daily life through repetition until it becomes the background noise of existence. In markets, shoppers hum patriotic songs unconsciously. In offices, workers quote Kim's speeches to impress their superiors. Even art and poetry are built around him. Flowers named after him, operas written in his honor, films crafted to glorify his family's greatness. Over time, the absurd becomes ordinary. There are stories of people dying in house fires while trying to save portraits of the leaders before escaping. Others have been punished for accidentally folding newspapers that displayed Kim's image. Every detail of life, from how one dresses to how one smiles in public, is shaped by fear disguised as devotion to the regime. Maintaining that illusion is essential. The government holds grand parades several times a year, where thousands of soldiers march in perfect synchrony through Kim Il-sung Square. Every step, every turn, every salute timed to perfection. The message isn't subtle. It's to show the world and the citizens that order reigns, that the system works, and that any deviation is unthinkable. Behind that flawless choreography, though, lies desperation. Each parade costs millions, money that could feed starving villages for months. But in North Korea, spectacle matters more than survival. The people are shown strength, so they never question weakness. In recent years, new construction projects have become a centerpiece of propaganda. Glittering high-rises in Pyongyang, water parks, ski resorts, all meant to show progress. Foreign journalists are invited to tour these model sites, but never beyond them. A few streets away, the reality is very different. Collapsed buildings, unlit homes, and quiet hunger. Still, the illusion holds. And yet the outside world keeps creeping in. Technology, once the regime's greatest fear, has become its greatest threat. Despite bans, small Chinese phones and USB drives are everywhere. Hidden deep in clothing or under floorboards, these tiny devices carry worlds of forbidden knowledge, films, news, pop songs, even satellite images. One defector recalled the first time he saw a USB of South Korean TV. "I thought it was fake," he said. "They were laughing, eating, driving nice cars. I didn't think people could live like that." For many, those moments change everything. The realization that they've been lied to all their lives doesn't cause rebellion right away. It causes silence, then curiosity, then quiet anger. And quiet anger is dangerous. The regime knows this. That's why punishment is collective. If one person is caught with foreign media, their entire family can be imprisoned. Parents, children, grandparents, all sent to camps under the 3 generations rule. The fear spreads like a disease. One person's mistake becomes everyone's warning. But the same control that once made the system invincible is now making it brittle. The more the government tightens its grip, the more resourceful the people become. Defectors speak of black markets operating under soldiers' noses, of families bribing officials for travel passes, of smuggling networks that stretch from Pyongyang to China. Corruption, once rare, has become the country's unofficial economy. Even the military isn't immune. Soldiers who once vowed to die for the regime now quietly sell fuel, food, or weapons to survive. The illusion of unity hides a growing rot underneath. Kim Jong-un sees it too, but instead of reforming, he doubles down. He announces new missile launches, new weapons tests, and new slogans. The louder the drums of war beat, the less people notice the hunger in their homes. Yet the regime's threats have evolved. Once it was the bomb. Now it's the keyboard. North Korea's army of hackers, trained from childhood in elite schools, are its invisible soldiers. They steal billions from banks, disrupt foreign systems, and fund the regime through cybercrime. It's a perfect weapon, invisible, deniable, and devastating. But even within the state cyber divisions, rumors spread. Young hackers, granted rare access to the global internet for their missions, catch glimpses of the world beyond their borders. Some defect, others vanish. Kim's government pretends not to notice, but it knows the truth. No wall, no censorship, no gun can stop information forever. Inside Pyongyang, Kim continues his balancing act, projecting confidence while fighting decay. He hosts lavish banquets, rides horses through snowy mountains, and delivers emotional speeches about sacrifice and loyalty. The images flood state media, carefully staged, to show a man both strong and compassionate. But away from the cameras, there are signs of strain. The economy, already crippled by sanctions, was shattered by the pandemic. The country's borders, once gateways for smuggling and limited trade, were sealed shut. Even basic medicine became scarce. International aid groups reported seeing famine conditions again by 2022. The regime denied it, claiming the people were thriving. But the grain reserves told another story. The same cycle of silence and suffering had begun again. And still, the people endure. That endurance is perhaps the regime's greatest weapon. For 70 years, generations have been taught that hardship is honorable, that suffering for the nation is a form of pride. When food runs out, the government tells them they are soldiers in a different kind of war, one against the enemies who block their progress. In this way, pain becomes patriotism. Yet history shows that no nation can live forever in isolation. Every wall eventually cracks. Every secret eventually leaks. The only question is when. There are whispers among defectors that even some within the elite now question the system's future. They live comfortably, but they see the decline. They know that while Pyongyang shines, the rest of the country withers. One defector, formerly a government official, said it best. We lived in a house built on lies, but the foundation is sinking. The Kim dynasty continues to present an image of immortality. Kim Jong-un's daughter, still a child, has already been shown at military events beside him, waving at missiles towering above the crowd. It's an unmistakable message. The dynasty will endure. But the truth is, even the strongest dynasties fall not from outside invasion, but from within. Every dictatorship eventually faces the same moment, the point where fear stops working, when hunger outweighs obedience. When the people realize their silence costs more than their voice. No one knows when that moment will come for North Korea. Maybe it'll happen quietly, without warning. A factory strike, a border guard who refuses an order, a rumor that spreads too fast to control. Or maybe it'll come suddenly, in the roar of a crowd that finally stops bowing. For now, the illusion holds. The statues still gleam. The parades still march. The loudspeakers still sing of glory and greatness. But beneath that performance lies a nation running out of time. A place where the lights of the South still glow bright across the border, visible, undeniable, and waiting. Each night, When the wind is right, faint echoes of music drift from across the demilitarized zone. Songs carried by the air, unheard by the rest of the world. Somewhere in the darkness, a North Korean soldier hears them. Maybe he pauses. Maybe he wonders what life sounds like on the other side. And maybe, for a fleeting second, he imagines what it would feel like to be free. That is how change begins, not with an army or a revolution, but with a question that refuses to die. Because the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. And in a land built entirely on lies, truth is the one thing the regime cannot afford to let in. The Kim dynasty stands today, as it has for generations, isolated, armed, and defiant. But its greatest threat isn't America or sanctions or even war, it's time. Time erodes fear. Time exposes truth. And one day, the people who were taught to cry on command may finally stop. They may look at the portraits, the statues, the flags, and see them not as symbols of greatness, but as reminders of everything they lost. When that day comes, the silence will break. And the sound that replaces it, the collective voice of millions finally speaking after decades of forced quiet, will be louder than any missile, stronger than any army, and impossible to silence again. Until then, North Korea remains the world's longest-running illusion, an empire of shadows still pretending to be eternal. But even shadows fade when the light finally returns.